Captain Daniel Rivers had been walking his patrol through the bustling marketplace of King Square for over 10 years. The afternoon sun cast long shadows between the merchant stalls, and the familiar sounds of haggling customers and calling vendors filled the air. As one of the senior royal guards, Daniel took pride in maintaining order and protecting the citizens during their daily activities. At 35 years old, Daniel had earned respect among both his fellow guards and the common people. Frame and steady gaze commanded attention, but it was his fair treatment of everyone, regardless of their social status, that had made him beloved in the community. He had grown up in a modest family himself, the son of a blacksmith, and he never forgot his humble beginnings. On this particular Tuesday afternoon, the marketplace was more crowded than usual. The harvest festival was approaching, and merchants from neighboring villages had come to sell their goods. Families with children wandered between the stalls, examining colorful fabrics, fresh produce, and handcrafted items. Daniel paused near the fountain in the center of the square, observing the cheerful chaos around him. His trained eyes automatically scanned for any signs of trouble, pickpockets, disputes between merchants, or any unusual activities that might require his attention. That's when he heard it, a sharp cry of pain that cut through the general noise of the marketplace. Daniel turned toward the sound and saw a scene that made his blood run cold. A well-dressed man in expensive clothes was standing over a small boy, no more than 6 or 7 years old. The child was on the ground, tears streaming down his dirty face, holding his cheek where a red mark was already forming. "You worthless little beggar," the man shouted, loud enough for half the marketplace to hear. "How dare you touch my coat with your filthy hands?" The boy scrambled backward on the cobblestones, his small body trembling with fear and pain. His clothes were patched and worn, clearly marking him as one of the many orphaned children who lived on the streets of the capital city. Daniel's jaw tightened as he recognized the man. Lord Benedict Ashworth was a wealthy merchant who had recently been granted a minor noble title through his connections and generous donations to the royal treasury. Ashworth was known for his arrogance and his belief that his new status made him superior to everyone around him. "Please, sir," the little boy whimpered, still cowering on the ground. "I was just trying to return your coin purse. It fell from your pocket." Indeed, Daniel could see a leather coin purse lying on the ground between the man and the child. The boy had clearly been trying to do a good deed by returning something that had been dropped, only to be rewarded with violence. "Liar," Ashworth snarled, raising his hand again, as if to strike the child once more. "You were trying to steal from me, you little rat." Daniel felt anger surge through his veins, but his training had taught him to assess situations carefully before acting. He quickly scanned the crowd that was beginning to gather around the scene. Most people were watching with obvious distress and disapproval, but no one was stepping forward to help the child. This wasn't surprising. Lord Ashworth's wealth and title meant that challenging him publicly could have serious consequences for common citizens. They might face harassment, loss of business, or even legal troubles if they crossed a man with his connections. But Daniel also noticed something else that made the situation even more complicated. Standing about 20 yards away, partially hidden behind a fruit vendor's stall, were 2 other royal guards, Lieutenant Marcus Cole and Sergeant William Hayes. They had clearly witnessed the entire incident, but they were making no move to intervene. Daniel knew why. Lord Ashworth was not just wealthy, he was also connected to several influential families in the royal court. Getting involved in a dispute with him, especially over a street orphan, could result in serious professional consequences.
The smart
thing, the politically safe thing, would be to look the other way and let the situation resolve itself. "I should have you arrested for attempted theft," Ashworth continued, his voice growing louder and more aggressive. "Maybe a few days in the dungeons would teach you to keep your dirty hands to yourself." The little boy's eyes widened with terror at the mention of the dungeons. Daniel could see that the child was not just afraid, he was genuinely confused and hurt by the accusation. The boy's small hand was still reaching toward the coin purse, evidence of his innocent intention to return what he had found. Daniel thought about his own childhood, remembering times when his family had struggled to put food on the table. remembered the kindness of strangers who had helped them during difficult periods, and the cruelty of others who had looked down on them because of their poverty. More importantly, he thought about his oath as a royal guard. He had sworn to protect all citizens of the kingdom, not just the wealthy and powerful ones. He had promised to uphold justice and defend those who couldn't defend themselves. Lord Ashworth raised his hand again, preparing to strike the cowering child for a second time. The crowd watched in tense silence, and Daniel could see the fear and helplessness in many faces.
Wow.
These were good people who wanted to help but were afraid of the consequences. Daniel made his decision. "Lord Ashworth," he called out in a clear, authoritative voice as he stepped forward through the crowd. "I need to speak with you." Ashworth turned, his hand still raised to strike. When he saw Daniel's Royal Guard uniform, his expression shifted from anger to annoyance. "Captain Rivers," Ashworth said with barely concealed irritation, "I'm dealing with a little thief here. This doesn't concern the Royal Guard." "Actually, it does," Daniel replied, moving closer to the scene. He positioned himself between Ashworth and the child, effectively shielding the boy from any further violence. Daniel could feel the eyes of everyone in the marketplace on him, including the other two guards who were still watching from their concealed position. He knew that his next words and actions would have consequences that extended far beyond this single incident. But as he looked down at the small boy's tear-stained face, and then back at Lord Ashworth's arrogant sneer, Daniel knew that some things were more important than political safety or career advancement. Some things were simply right or wrong, regardless of the cost. Daniel knelt down beside the frightened boy, keeping his body between the child and Lord Ashworth. Up close, he could see that the little boy was even younger than he had first thought, probably no more than 5 or 6 years old, the child's. Clothes were clean despite being patched, suggesting that someone was caring for him, even if they had very little money. "What's your name, son?" Daniel asked gently, his voice a stark contrast to the harsh tones that had been directed at the boy moments before. "Tommy," the child whispered, still trembling but seeming slightly comforted by Daniel's kind demeanor. "Tommy Fletcher, sir?" "Well, Tommy Fletcher, can you tell me exactly what happened here?" Daniel asked, his tone patient and encouraging. Tommy glanced nervously at Lord Ashworth, who was growing more impatient by the moment, then looked back at Daniel. "I was walking past the bread stall when I saw something fall from the gentleman's coat. It was his coin purse, sir. I picked it up and ran after him to give it back, but when I touched his sleeve to get his attention, he got very angry." Daniel looked at the leather coin purse that was still lying on the cobblestones. It was clearly expensive, made of fine leather with silver clasps, definitely belonging to a wealthy man like Ashworth. The positioning of the purse, halfway between where Ashworth stood and where Tommy had fallen, supported the boy's story. "Captain Rivers," Ashworth interrupted impatiently, "I don't have time for this nonsense. The boy was obviously trying to steal from me. I caught him with his hands on my person, and I responded appropriately to protect my property." Daniel stood up slowly, turning to face Ashworth directly. "Lord Ashworth, I've been observing this situation, and I believe there's been a misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" Ashworth's voice rose with indignation. "Captain, are you suggesting that I don't know what I saw with my own eyes?" The crowd around them had grown larger, and Daniel could feel the tension in the air. He was aware that Lieutenant Cole and Sergeant Hayes were still watching from their position near the fruit stall, probably wondering what he was planning to do. "What I'm suggesting," Daniel said calmly, "is that we examine the evidence before drawing conclusions." He walked over and picked up the coin purse, noting its weight and the way the leather showed signs of having been dropped rather than torn from someone's possession. He also observed the boy's position relative to where the purse had fallen. "Lord Ashworth, if Tommy had been trying to steal this purse, he would have run away with it immediately. Instead, he approached you directly, in full view of dozens of witnesses. Does that sound like the behavior of a thief?" Ashworth's face reddened with anger. "Captain Rivers, are you questioning my judgment? I am a lord of this realm, and I will not be interrogated by a common guard over the word of a street urchin." Daniel felt the insult sting, but he kept his expression neutral. This was exactly the kind of response he had expected from Ashworth, an appeal to social status rather than facts or justice. "Lord Ashworth, my duty is to determine the truth in any situation involving potential criminal activity. That duty applies equally to all citizens, regardless of their social position." The crowd murmured approvingly at Daniel's words, though they tried to keep their voices low. Most of these people dealt with the arrogance of nobles and wealthy merchants regularly, and they appreciated seeing someone stand up for fairness. Ashworth seemed to realize that the crowd was not on his side. His eyes narrowed as he looked around at the watching faces, many of which showed clear disapproval of his treatment of the child. "Very well," Ashworth said through gritted teeth. "Investigate all you want. 8. But when you're finished with this charade, I expect that boy to be punished for his insolence. No one touches my person without consequences." Daniel walked back to Tommy, who was now sitting on the ground, still holding his reddened cheek. The boy looked up at Daniel with a mixture of hope and fear in his eyes. "Tommy, I need you to show me exactly what happened. Can you do that for me?" Tommy nodded and slowly stood up. Despite his fear, there was a determination in his small face that reminded Daniel of his own childhood resilience. "I was walking from there to there," Tommy said, pointing from the bread stall to a spot about 10 yards away. "I saw the shiny thing fall from the man's coat, so I picked it up and ran after him." Tommy demonstrated his actions, showing how he had hurried to catch up with Ashworth and had gently touched the man's sleeve to get his attention. "I said, 'Excuse me, sir, you dropped this,'" Tommy explained. "But he turned around really fast and hit me before I could show him the purse." Daniel nodded, noting how Tommy's story remained consistent and detailed. He also noticed that several people in the crowd were nodding, apparently having witnessed the same sequence of events. "Did anyone else see what happened?" Daniel asked, addressing the crowd directly. An older woman stepped forward nervously. "I saw it, Captain. The boy was definitely trying to return the purse. He's a good child. His grandmother lives near me, and she's raised him to be honest and helpful." A merchant from one of the nearby stalls also spoke up. "I saw the whole thing too. The boy did nothing wrong. He was just trying to be kind, and he got punished for it." More voices joined in, all supporting Tommy's version of events. Daniel could see that Lord Ashworth was becoming increasingly uncomfortable as the crowd's testimony painted a clear picture of what had really happened. "This is ridiculous," Ashworth declared. "I refuse to be subjected to trial by mob in a public marketplace. Captain Rivers, I demand that you arrest this boy immediately, or I will report your insubordination to your superiors." Daniel felt the full weight of the threat. He knew that Ashworth had connections in the royal court and could potentially make serious trouble for him professionally. Complaint from a titled noble could result in disciplinary action, demotion, or even dismissal from the guard. He glanced toward where Lieutenant Cole and Sergeant Hayes were still watching. Both men had expressions that clearly said they thought Daniel was making a serious mistake by confronting Ashworth so directly, but then Daniel looked down at Tommy again. The little boy was looking up at him with complete trust, believing that this royal guard would protect him and see that justice was done. Daniel thought about all the times in his career when he had been forced to look the other way, while powerful people abused those with less status or money. He thought about the oath he had taken to serve justice, not just power. "Lord Ashworth," Daniel said firmly, based on the evidence and witness testimony, "I believe Tommy Fletcher was attempting to return your property when he was struck. Under kingdom law, striking a child without justification is considered assault, regardless of the social status of either party involved." The silence that followed Daniel's words was deafening. The entire marketplace seemed to hold its breath as the weight of his accusation settled over the scene. Lord Ashworth's face turned from red to purple with rage, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. "How dare you?" Ashworth whispered, his voice trembling with fury. "How dare you accuse me of assault? I am Lord Benedict Ashworth. I will not tolerate such insolence from a common guard who clearly doesn't understand his place." Daniel remained calm, though his heart was pounding. He could see Lieutenant Cole and Sergeant Hayes moving closer, now probably preparing to intervene before the situation escalated further. He knew they were trying to protect him from making what they saw as a career-ending mistake. "Lord Ashworth," Daniel continued steadily, The law applies to everyone. In this kingdom, if you believe that Tommy attempted to steal from you, then we can take this matter to the magistrate and let him decide based on the evidence. But striking a child is not acceptable under any circumstances. Evidence? Ashworth scoffed. What? Evidence? The word of street beggars and market vendors? You think any magistrate would take their testimony over mine? Unfortunately, Daniel knew that Ashworth was probably right about that. The legal system often favored the wealthy and titled, especially when their accusers were poor or of low social standing. But that didn't make it right. Tommy had been listening to this exchange with growing understanding of what was happening. Despite his young age, he seemed to grasp that Daniel was risking something important to defend him. "Captain Rivers," Tommy said in his small voice, "it's okay. I don't want you to get in trouble because of me." Daniel knelt down again to Tommy's level, placing a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. "Tommy, what happened to you was wrong, and it's my job to make sure wrong things are made right. You don't need to worry about me." The kindness in Daniel's voice and actions was not lost on the watching crowd. Many of them were parents themselves, and they could imagine how they would feel if one of their children had been treated the way Tommy had been. An old man near the back of the crowd called out, "The captain's right. Because a man has money doesn't mean he can hit children." Other voices began to join in, expressing support for Daniel's position. The crowd was clearly on Tommy's side. But Daniel knew that popular support wouldn't protect him from the political consequences of his actions. "Lord," Ashworth looked around at the increasingly hostile crowd and seemed to realize that he needed to regain control of the situation quickly. "Captain Rivers," he said in a voice that was now coldly controlled, "I can see that you've been influenced by the emotions of this mob. Perhaps you're not thinking clearly about the consequences of your actions." Ashworth stepped closer to Daniel, lowering his voice so that only the captain could hear his next words. "I know people in the royal court, Captain. Important people who value loyalty and understand the proper order of society. Cross me today, and I promise you that your career as a royal guard will be over before the week is out. Think about your future, your family, your pension. Is defending this worthless street child really worth throwing all of that away?" Daniel felt a chill run through him. Ashworth's threat was not an empty one. The man did indeed have connections among the nobility, and a word from him in the right ears could destroy Daniel's career and livelihood. Daniel thought about his own family, his wife Sarah, and their 2 young daughters. Sarah worked as a seamstress, but her income alone wouldn't be enough to support them if Daniel lost his position. They had saved some money over the years, but not enough to survive for long without his guard's salary. He also thought about the other royal guards who depended on him as their captain. If he were dismissed in disgrace, it could reflect poorly on his entire unit and potentially harm their careers as well. But then he looked at Tommy again. The little boy was watching him with complete trust, still believing that this royal guard would do the right thing. Daniel saw in Tommy's eyes the same hope that he had once felt as a child when adults had stood up for him during difficult times. "Lord Ashworth," Daniel said, loud enough for the crowd to hear, "I appreciate your concern for my career, but my duty is clear. I swore an oath to protect all citizens of this kingdom and to uphold justice without favor or prejudice." Ashworth's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Very well, Captain. You've made your choice. Don't say you weren't warned about the consequences." At that moment, Lieutenant Cole and Sergeant Hayes finally approached the scene. Both men looked extremely uncomfortable, clearly wishing they could be anywhere else. "Captain Rivers, Lieutenant," Cole said quietly, "perhaps we should discuss this situation privately before taking any further action." Daniel understood what Cole was really saying. His fellow guards were giving him one last chance to back down gracefully, to find some compromise that wouldn't result in his professional destruction. "Lieutenant Cole," Daniel replied, "there's nothing to discuss privately." Lord Ashworth struck. "A child in public, without justification, and in front of numerous witnesses. The facts are clear." Sergeant Hayes stepped closer. "Captain, with all due respect, maybe we should consider all aspects of this situation. Lord Ashworth is an important member of the community and the boy is unharmed." Daniel's voice rose with indignation. Look at his face, Sergeant. Let's look at the mark where he was struck. And more importantly, look at the fear in his eyes. This child will remember this moment for the rest of his life." The crowd murmured their agreement, and Daniel could see that his words had touched many of them. These were people who understood what it meant to be powerless in the face of wealth and authority. Tommy stepped forward and tugged. When the captain looked down, the boy whispered, "Thank you for believing me, sir. No one ever believed me before." Those words hit Daniel like a physical blow. This little boy had probably faced injustice and dismissal many times in his short life simply because of his poverty and social status. Today, for perhaps the first time, an adult with authority was standing up for him. Daniel made his final decision. "Lord Ashworth," he said in a clear, carrying voice, "I am placing you under arrest for assault against a minor. You have the right to request legal representation, and this matter will be heard by a magistrate." The crowd erupted in surprised chatter. Lieutenant Cole and Sergeant Hayes looked shocked, and Lord Ashworth's face turned almost black with rage. "Fool," Ashworth hissed. "You have no idea what you've just done. By tomorrow morning, you'll be nothing more than another unemployed ex-guard begging for work in the streets." Daniel felt the truth of those words. But he also felt something else, a sense of peace and rightness that he hadn't experienced in years. For once, he had chosen justice over convenience, courage over caution. Perhaps Daniel replied calmly, "But tonight, I'll sleep knowing that I kept my oath." The arrest of Lord Ashworth created an immediate commotion in the marketplace. Several of Ashworth's servants who had been shopping nearby rushed forward when they saw their master being detained by the royal guards. The crowd pressed closer, some cheering Daniel's actions while others whispered nervously about the potential consequences. "This is outrageous," one of Ashworth's servants exclaimed. "You cannot arrest a lord of the realm over the word of a street beggar." Daniel remained calm as he secured Ashworth's hands with iron restraints, a standard procedure for any arrest. The arrest is based on witnessed assault, not on anyone's word alone. Lord Ashworth will have the opportunity to present his defense to a magistrate. Lieutenant Cole approached Daniel with obvious concern. "Captain, I strongly advise you to reconsider this action. Perhaps we could handle this matter through official channels without a public arrest." Daniel understood Cole's worry. A public arrest of a noble was almost unprecedented, especially over an incident involving a poor child. The political ramifications would be severe and immediate. "Lieutenant, the assault happened in public, in front of dozens of witnesses. A private resolution would send the message that justice depends on social status rather than facts." Sergeant Hayes was already looking around nervously, as if expecting Ashworth's powerful friends to appear at any moment. "Captain Rivers, what if we're wrong about this? What if Lord Ashworth's version of events is correct?" Tommy, who had been quiet during the arrest, suddenly spoke up with surprising courage. "I'm not lying, sir. I was just trying to help. My grandmother always taught me to return things that don't belong to me." An elderly woman pushed through the crowd and knelt beside Tommy, wrapping her arms around the boy protectively. Daniel realized this must be the grandmother Tommy had mentioned. "Thank you, Captain," the woman said, tears in her eyes. "Tommy is a good boy. He would never steal anything. I've raised him to be honest and kind, just like his parents would have wanted before they died of the fever." Daniel felt his resolve strengthen even further. Tommy was an orphan being raised by his grandmother, trying to do the right thing in a world that often showed little kindness to people in his situation. Lord Ashworth, despite being restrained, continued his verbal assault. "Mark my words, Captain Rivers. By this time tomorrow, you'll be stripped of your rank and thrown out of the guard in disgrace. I have friends in the royal court who will ensure that you pay dearly for this humiliation." The crowd began to react angrily to Ashworth's threats. A baker from one of the nearby stalls called out, "Good for you, Captain. Someone needs to stand up to these bullies." A woman holding a small child added, "What if that had been my son? Would we just ignore it because the man has money?" More voices joined in, expressing support for Daniel's actions and disgust at Ashworth's behavior. The captain realized that while his career might be in jeopardy, he had clearly done something that resonated deeply with the common people. Lieutenant Cole pulled Daniel aside and spoke in urgent, low tones. Daniel, I understand why you did this, but think about Sarah and your daughters. How will you support them if you lose your position? There has to be another way to handle this. Daniel appreciated his friend's concern, but his mind was made up. Marcus, what kind of example am I setting for my daughters if I teach them that justice only applies to some people? What kind of man would I be if I let fear override my principles? As they prepared to escort Lord Ashworth to the guard station for processing, a commotion arose at the edge of the crowd. A well-dressed man on horseback was pushing through the gathered people, clearly heading toward the scene. Daniel recognized the newcomer immediately, Sir Geoffrey Whitmore, one of the senior advisors to the royal court and a known associate of Lord Ashworth. Daniel's heart sank as he realized that Ashworth's political allies were already mobilizing against him.
Oh.
What is the meaning of this? Sir Geoffrey demanded as he dismounted and strode toward the group. I received word that Lord Ashworth was being harassed by guards in the marketplace. Lord Ashworth's face lit up with vindictive satisfaction. Geoffrey, thank God you're here. This insubordinate captain has arrested me over an incident with a street thief. I demand that he be disciplined immediately. Sir Geoffrey turned his stern gaze on Daniel, clearly expecting immediate deference to his authority. Captain Rivers, I presume? Release Lord Ashworth immediately and report to the guard headquarters for disciplinary action? The crowd fell silent, watching to see how Daniel would respond to this obvious display of political pressure. Tommy pressed closer to his grandmother, sensing the tension in the air. Daniel straightened his shoulders and met Sir Geoffrey's gaze directly. Sir Geoffrey, with respect, Lord Ashworth is under arrest for assault. The proper procedure is for him to be processed through the magistrate's office, where he can present his defense. Sir Geoffrey's face reddened with anger. Captain Rivers, do you have any idea who you're dealing with? Lord Ashworth is a respected member of the nobility and a significant contributor to the royal treasury. Your accusations are not only false, but potentially treasonous. Treasonous. Daniel felt a chill at the word. Treason was a capital offense, punishable by death in extreme cases, or life imprisonment in others. Yes, treasonous, sir, Geoffrey continued. You are undermining the natural order of society by placing the word of a beggar child above that of a lord. Such actions threaten the stability of the realm itself. The crowd began to murmur angrily at Sir Geoffrey's words. Many of these people were hard-working citizens who resented the implication that their testimony and their children's safety mattered less than a noble's reputation. Tommy's grandmother stood up, her voice shaking with emotion. My grandson is not a beggar. He's a good child who was trying to do a kindness. Why should that matter less than this man's pride? Sir Geoffrey barely glanced at the woman. The opinions of commoners are not relevant to this discussion. Daniel felt his anger rising at the casual dismissal of Tommy's grandmother in the crowd of witnesses. These were the people he had sworn to protect and serve, and seeing them treated with such contempt strengthened his resolve. Sir Geoffrey, Daniel said firmly. Under the laws of this kingdom, assault is a crime, regardless of who commits it or who the victim is. I have numerous witnesses to the incident, and I will not release Lord Ashworth until he has been properly processed. The confrontation was drawing even more attention, people from all corners of the marketplace coming to see what was happening. Word was spreading quickly about the captain, who had arrested a lord for hitting a child. Sir Geoffrey realized that the situation was spiraling out of his control. The crowd was clearly on Daniel's side, and any attempt to force the release of Lord Ashworth would likely result in a riot. Very well, Captain Rivers, Sir Geoffrey said through gritted teeth. Process Lord Ashworth if you must. But understand that your career is over. By tonight, orders will be issued for your immediate dismissal from the Royal Guard. Daniel nodded calmly. I understand, Sir Geoffrey, but I would rather face unemployment with my honor intact than keep my position by abandoning my principles. Daniel and his fellow guards began to escort Lord Ashworth away from the marketplace. The crowd erupted in spontaneous applause. People reached out to touch Daniel's arm or pat his shoulder, expressing their gratitude and admiration for his courage. Tommy ran up beside Daniel and tugged on his uniform again. When the captain looked down, the little boy smiled through his Tears, Captain Rivers. When I grow up, I want to be just like you. Those words meant more to Daniel than any commendation or promotion ever could. That evening, Daniel sat in the guard station completing the arrest report for Lord Ashworth. His hands were steady as he wrote, but his mind was racing with thoughts about what the next day would bring. Lieutenant Cole and Sergeant Hayes sat nearby, their expressions reflecting the gravity of the situation. "Daniel," Lieutenant Cole said quietly, "you know, we support what you did morally, but I'm worried about you and your family. Maybe there's still time to find some kind of compromise before this goes too far." Daniel looked up from his writing. "Marcus, what kind of compromise could there be? Either Lord Ashworth committed assault, or he didn't. Either the law applies equally to everyone, or it doesn't." Before Cole could respond, the door to the guard station burst open. Captain Thomas Hartwell, the commander of all royal guards in the capital, entered with a grim expression on his weathered face. Behind him walked Sir Geoffrey Whitmore, looking smugly satisfied. Captain Rivers, Commander Hartwell said formally, "You are hereby relieved of duty pending a full investigation into your conduct today. Surrender your badge and sword immediately." Daniel had been expecting this moment since the confrontation in the marketplace, but hearing the words still felt like a physical blow. He slowly stood up and began removing his badge and weapons, placing them carefully on the desk. "Commander Hartwell," Daniel said respectfully, "I request that the investigation include testimony from all witnesses to the incident, not just Lord Ashworth's version of events." Sir Geoffrey stepped forward with obvious irritation. "Captain Rivers, your request is noted but irrelevant. The word of Lord Ashworth carries considerably more weight than the testimony of marketplace rabble." Lieutenant Cole couldn't remain silent any longer. "Sir Geoffrey, with respect, there were dozens of witnesses to the incident. Their testimony should at least be considered." "Lieutenant Cole," Commander Hartwell warned, "you would be wise not to associate yourself too closely with Captain Rivers' insubordination. Your own career could be affected." The threat was clear, and Daniel could see the conflict in his friends. Face Cole had his own family to think about, his own career to protect. "Commander," Daniel said, "Lieutenant Cole was simply observing proper procedure. All my actions today were my own responsibility." Sir Geoffrey consulted a document he had brought with him. "Captain Rivers, in addition to your dismissal from the Royal Guard, you are being charged with insubordination, abuse of authority, and making false accusations against a member of the nobility. These charges will be heard by a tribunal of Lord Ashworth's peers." Daniel felt his blood run cold. A tribunal of nobles would almost certainly rule in favor of Lord Ashworth, regardless of the evidence. Such charges could result not just in unemployment, but in imprisonment or heavy fines that would destroy his family financially. Furthermore, Sir Geoffrey continued, "You are forbidden from having any contact with the child involved in this incident or his family. Any attempt to influence their testimony will result in additional charges." As Daniel prepared to leave the guard station, Lieutenant Cole approached him quietly. "Daniel, Sarah is waiting outside. She heard what happened and came as soon as she could." Daniel's heart ached at the thought of facing his wife with the news that he had thrown away their security and future. But he also knew that Sarah understood his principles better than anyone. He walked outside and found Sarah standing in the evening shadows, her face pale but determined. When she saw him, she ran to his arms without hesitation. "Back, Daniel," she said. Softly, "Tell me what happened. I heard so many different stories." Daniel explained everything, finding Tommy being struck. The confrontation with Lord Ashworth, the arrest, and the consequences that were now unfolding. Interruption, her hand resting supportively on his arm. When he finished, Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Finally, she looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "I'm proud of you," she said simply. "I married a man of honor, and nothing that happens next will change that." Daniel felt a wave of relief and love wash over him. Whatever challenges they faced, at least they would face them together. "Sarah, I don't know how we'll manage financially. I may not find work anywhere if word spreads about what happened today." Sarah squeezed his hand. "We'll figure it out together. Our daughters need to see that their father is a man who stands up for what's right, even when it's difficult." As they walked home through the quiet streets, Daniel noticed that they weren't alone. Small groups of people were following at a respectful distance: marketplace vendors, craftsmen, laborers, and families with children. Word of Daniel's actions had spread throughout the common districts of the city. When they reached their modest house, Daniel was amazed to find dozens of people gathered outside. As he and Sarah approached, the crowd began to applaud, just as the marketplace crowd had done earlier. An elderly baker stepped forward, holding a basket of fresh bread. "Captain Rivers, this is for your family. It's not much, but we wanted you to know that good people appreciate what you did today." A seamstress approached with a bundle of warm clothing. "For your daughters, Captain. Every child in this city is safer because of your courage today." More people came forward with small gifts: vegetables, meat, coins, handmade items. Daniel realized that while the wealthy and powerful had turned against him, the common people were rallying to support him and his family. "Thank you," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "All of you. But please don't put yourselves at risk by associating with me. Lord Ashworth and his friends have long memories." A middle-aged blacksmith laughed grimly. "We've been at risk from men like Ashworth our whole lives." The difference is that today, someone finally stood up to them. A woman holding a young boy stepped forward. "My son wanted to meet the guard who protected Tommy. He wants to know that there are still good people in positions of authority." Little boy looked up at Daniel with wide, admiring eyes. "Are you really going to lose your job for helping Tommy, sir?" Daniel knelt down to the child's level, just as he had with Tommy earlier that day. "Sometimes, son, doing the right thing comes with a price. But that doesn't mean we should stop doing what's right." As the crowd began to disperse, promising continued support, Daniel and Sarah went inside their home. Their two daughters, 8-year-old Emma and 6-year-old Lucy, were waiting anxiously. "Papa," Emma said, running to hug him, "Mrs. Henderson from next door told us you were in trouble for helping a little boy." "Is that true?" Daniel sat down and gathered both his daughters close. "Yes, Emma. Today I saw a man hurt a little boy who had done nothing wrong. I had to choose between keeping my job and doing what was right." "What did you choose, Papa?" Lucy asked, with the innocent directness of a 6-year-old. "I chose to do what was right," Daniel replied, "and I would make the same choice again." Emma looked thoughtful. "Papa, if someone was hurting me and a guard saw it, would you want the guard to help me even if it got him in trouble?" "Yes, sweetheart. I would want any decent person to help you, regardless of the consequences." "Then you did the right thing," Emma said with the simple logic of childhood. As Daniel tucked his daughters into bed that night, he reflected on the day's events. He had lost his career, faced serious legal charges, and put his family's financial security at risk. But he had also discovered something important about himself and about the community he served. The next morning brought unexpected developments. Daniel was awakened by urgent knocking at his door. When he opened it, he found Tommy's grandmother standing on his doorstep with tears streaming down her face. "Captain Rivers," she said, "something wonderful has happened. You need to come with me right away." Confused but concerned, Daniel quickly dressed and followed the elderly woman through the streets toward the marketplace. As they walked, she explained what had occurred during the night. "After word spread about what you did for Tommy, people started talking about their own experiences with Lord Ashworth and his friends. They remembered other incidents, other injustices that were never addressed because the victims were too poor or too afraid to speak up. They reached the marketplace to find an extraordinary scene. Dozens of people were gathered around a well-dressed man Daniel didn't recognize. The man was writing furiously in a large ledger, carefully recording testimony from person after person. Grandmother led Daniel closer to the group. "Captain Rivers, I'd like you to meet Magistrate William Bradford. He arrived this morning after receiving some very interesting information about yesterday's incident." Magistrate Bradford looked up from his writing and extended his hand to Daniel. "Captain Rivers, I've been hearing remarkable stories about your actions yesterday. More importantly, I've been hearing about a pattern of behavior from Lord Ashworth that extends far beyond yesterday's incident." Daniel shook the magistrate's hand, confused by this turn of events. "Sir, I don't understand. I was told that Lord Ashworth would be tried by a tribunal of his peers." Magistrate Bradford smiled grimly. That was before I received a personal message from someone very high in the royal court, someone who has been watching the situation with great interest. It seems your actions yesterday have attracted attention. From unexpected quarters? Before Daniel could ask what he meant, another commotion arose at the edge of the crowd. A royal carriage, bearing the personal seal of the king himself, was approaching the marketplace. The crowd fell silent as the carriage stopped and two figures stepped out. Daniel's heart pounded as he recognized them: Sir Edmund Fairfax, the king's personal advisor, and behind him a figure that made Daniel's knees nearly buckle. It was King Edward himself, dressed in simple traveling clothes, but unmistakably royal in his bearing and presence. The king had come to the marketplace personally to investigate what had happened. The entire marketplace fell to their knees as King Edward approached. But the monarch gestured for everyone to rise. Daniel's mind raced as he tried to understand how this situation had escalated to royal attention so quickly. "Captain Rivers," the king said in a clear, authoritative voice, "I have heard conflicting reports about yesterday's events. I have come to hear the truth directly from those involved." Daniel bowed deeply, his heart pounding. "Your Majesty, I am honored by your presence, though I fear my actions may have caused unnecessary controversy." King Edward studied Daniel's face carefully. "Captain, controversy often accompanies justice when it challenges those who believe themselves above the law. Tell me exactly what happened yesterday." Daniel recounted the events in detail, finding Tommy being struck. The confrontation with Lord Ashworth, the arrest, and the subsequent threats and dismissal from the guard. Throughout his account, the king listened intently, occasionally glancing at the crowd of witnesses who had gathered around them. When Daniel finished, King Edward turned to Tommy, who stood close to his grandmother, still showing the faint bruise on his cheek from the previous day. "Young Tommy," the king said gently, kneeling to the boy's level, "can you tell me what happened when you found Lord Ashworth's purse?" Tommy looked nervously at his grandmother, who nodded encouragingly. In a small but clear voice, Tommy told his story exactly as he had the day before, finding the dropped purse, trying to return it, and being struck for his honesty. King Edward stood and addressed Magistrate Bradford. "Magistrate, what have you discovered in your investigation this morning?" Magistrate Bradford consulted his notes. "Your Majesty, I have recorded testimony from over 30 witnesses, all of whom corroborate young Tommy's account of yesterday's events. More significantly, I have documented a pattern of similar behavior from Lord Ashworth spanning several years." The magistrate opened his ledger and began reading. Mrs. Sarah Collins testified that Lord Ashworth struck her 10-year-old son last month for accidentally bumping into him. Thomas Wright, a baker, reported that Ashworth destroyed his market stall in anger when told his bread order wasn't ready. Margaret Foster stated that Ashworth had her teenage daughter arrested on false theft charges after she refused his inappropriate advances. The crowd murmured angrily as the list of abuses continued. Daniel realized that yesterday's incident had opened the floodgates for people to finally speak out about years of bullying and intimidation. King Edward's expression grew darker with each account. And where was Lord Ashworth tried for these previous incidents? "He was not tried, Your Majesty," Magistrate Bradford replied grimly. In each case, the complaints were dismissed, or the victims were discouraged from pursuing charges due to Lord Ashworth's social status and connections. At that moment, another carriage arrived at the marketplace. Sir Geoffrey Whitmore stepped out, followed by Lord Ashworth himself. Both men looked supremely confident, obviously expecting the king's presence to result in Daniel's severe punishment. "Your Majesty, sir," Geoffrey said with an elaborate bow, "I am pleased that you have come to address this unfortunate situation personally. Lord Ashworth and I are prepared to show mercy toward Captain Rivers if he publicly apologizes for his inexcusable behavior." King Edward turned to face Sir Geoffrey and Lord Ashworth with an expression that made both men take an involuntary step backward. "Sir Geoffrey," the king said in a voice that carried across the entire marketplace, "I have spent the morning listening to testimony about Lord Ashworth's behavior, not just yesterday but over many years. I have heard from dozens of my subjects who have suffered abuse at his hands." Lord Ashworth's face went pale. Majesty, surely you cannot take the word of common rabble over that of a lord of the realm." The king's eyes flashed with anger. "Lord Ashworth, these common rabble are my subjects, and they deserve the same protection under the law as any noble. Captain Rivers understood that fundamental principle when he arrested you yesterday." Sir Geoffrey tried to intervene. "Majesty, with respect, Captain Rivers exceeded his authority by arresting a member of the nobility without proper consultation." "Sir Geoffrey," the king interrupted, "Captain Rivers acted exactly as any royal guard should act when witnessing a crime. His only error was in having superiors who cared more about political convenience than justice." The king turned to address the entire crowd, his voice carrying clearly across the marketplace. "Let it be known throughout my kingdom that the law applies equally to all citizens, regardless of their birth, wealth, or title. Any person who abuses their position to harm others will face the full consequences of their actions." He gestured toward Lord Ashworth. "Benedict Ashworth, you are hereby stripped of your title and properties for multiple counts of assault and abuse of authority. You will be imprisoned and tried as a common criminal, which is what you have proven yourself to be." The crowd erupted in cheers as guards moved to arrest the stunned former lord. Sir Geoffrey's face went ashen as he realized that his own association with Ashworth had put his position in jeopardy. King Edward then turned to Daniel, who stood at attention, despite no longer wearing his guard uniform. "Captain Rivers," the king said, "you have reminded me, in this entire kingdom, what it means to serve justice rather than convenience. Your actions yesterday demonstrated the highest ideals of the royal guard." The king paused, reaching into his coat to remove an official document bearing the royal seal. "Therefore, I am not only reinstating you to the royal guard, but promoting you to commander of the Capitol Guard, with full authority to ensure that justice is administered fairly throughout my realm." Daniel felt his knees grow weak with relief and amazement. Not only was his career saved, but he was being given the power to prevent the kind of injustices he had witnessed throughout his service. "Furthermore," the king continued, "young Tommy Fletcher has shown remarkable courage and honesty in the face of adversity. I am establishing a scholarship in his name to ensure that children like Tommy receive the education they deserve regardless of their family's economic circumstances." Tommy's grandmother began crying with joy as she hugged her grandson tightly. Tommy looked up at Daniel with a smile that could have lit up the entire marketplace. The king approached Daniel personally and spoke in a voice meant only for him. "Commander Rivers, yesterday you abandoned what others saw as your duty to politics and power. In reality, you embraced your true duty to justice and honor. That is the kind of man I need leading my guards." As the royal party prepared to leave, King Edward made one final announcement to the crowd. "Let this day be remembered not for the fall of a corrupt noble, but for the courage of a guard who chose honor over convenience, and for the bravery of a child who tried to do a kindness and found a champion when he needed one most." That evening, as Daniel sat in his home with Sarah and his daughters, he reflected on the extraordinary turn his life had taken in just 2 days. He had risked everything to stand up for a child he didn't even know, and in doing so, had discovered that sometimes doing the right thing, even when it seems impossible, can change not just individual lives, but entire communities. Tommy Fletcher would grow up knowing that someone had believed in his honesty and protected him when he was vulnerable. Dozens of other citizens would sleep better knowing that wealth and title could no longer shield abusers from consequences. And Daniel Rivers had learned that true honor sometimes requires abandoning what others called duty in order to serve a higher, calling the duty to protect the innocent and defend justice, no matter the cost. His daughters listened with wide eyes as he told them about the day's events. And Emma asked the question that would stay with Daniel for the rest of his life. "Papa, how did you know that helping Tommy was the right thing to do, even when everyone said it was wrong?" Daniel thought carefully before answering. "Emma, sometimes your heart knows what's right, even when your mind is afraid. Someone being hurt and you have the power to help them, that's not really a choice at all. It's simply what good people do." In the years that followed, Commander Daniel Rivers would face many difficult decisions. But he would always remember the lesson learned in King Square Marketplace, that true strength lies not in serving power, but in serving justice, especially when it requires the courage to stand alone.